The apocalypse often conjures images of nuclear fallout, humans fleeing killer machines, or rivers of blood and fire. And sure, maybe that's what awaits. No one knows. And as discussed in our last episode, a lot of very smart people who know a lot about all of these things are terrified. But there's another kind of apocalypse that is just as pernicious, and it operates within us. In some ways, it is us. This is the enfeeblement or deep rotting of our brains. This is the apocalypse of the mind, and maybe it's already happened. The world as we know it, one could argue, is only real insofar as the human mind processes a unique set of coherent images and ideas from an infinite amount of external stimuli. If that processing power is destroyed, or even diminished, does the world end? Is it possible that it's ended already? In Homer's Odyssey, the Lotus Eaters forgot everything: who they were, where they came from, why any of it mattered. Odysseus had to actually drag his men back to their ships to drag them out of their haze. The lotus was a fruit with narcotic qualities. Ours is a digital apple that sits in our pocket, begging for our attention 24 hours a day. And there's no hero coming to drag us away. In this episode, we are looking at artificial intelligence and related technology as they wage war against the human mind. This is episode 4 of Suspicious Minds, AI in the Apocalypse. We are looking at AI, brain rot, and why our loss of attention is an apocalypse of the mind that threatens what it means to be human. Before we get too deep into this episode, I just want to say thank you to all of you for listening, for sharing, for commenting, just for engaging with what we're making. It means everything, truly. To make sure you don't miss an episode, click subscribe or follow, depending on which platform you're on right now, and feel free to give us a comment or to rate us. We really appreciate it. And it helps with the algorithm, which we're fighting against just as much as all of you are. Anyway, thank you, and back to the show. In our last season, we introduced the concept that AI has the potential to enfeeble us mentally. Nate Sharadin from the Center for AI Safety discussed something we might call the Wall-E effect, and it's worth revisiting this as context for this episode. He asserts that the vast and breathtaking applications of human cognition are actually not all installed by evolution. Some are developed and maintained by all of us all the time. And if we stop using these faculties, what happens then? If you're around my age, there was probably a time when you could remember dozens of 7-digit sequences of numbers. When we stopped needing to memorize phone numbers, we lost that. I mean, I know I did. Yes, with daily practice, we could acquire that skill again. But that's probably not going to happen when I can just punch numbers into my contacts on my smartphone. Here's Nate Sharadin on this phenomenon.
So I think in the future, reliance on very capable systems, even if they don't approach anything like superhuman level or even human level, could make us stupid in a very specific way. So AI is going to reduce the marginal incentives that people have to develop a core set of cognitive skills, like those involved in executive function, but also sort of social skills, various kinds of abilities to interact with other people. These are core regulatory, core cognitive skills that don't come for free. They're not the kinds of things that we just pick up. Instead, you have to work at their development and they have to be maintained over time. These are things like inhibitory control, famously attention is a core cognitive skill like this. We've seen that sort of degrade over the last, call it 15 years, right? There's a scientific consensus now that social media has been bad for our attention. But now we're very busy developing technology that's supposedly going to be good at replacing not just attentional capacity, but able to do all of the core cognitive things on our behalf. And so we'll just people will just get worse at these things over time. There's this enfeeblement thing happening. Everybody's in the Wall-E chairs and they're just kind of floating around the spaceship, which is we got so good at automation of all this shit that we also created machines that could run our lives for us. But it's not just they're kind of physically enfeebled, which they are. They're kind of just sitting there in their chairs like blobs. But they're also cognitively enfeebled. I think it's a kind of nice, kind of jokey version of the story. There, I mean, you've got kind of universal enfeeblement, right? Like all of humanity has like committed itself to the chairs. I don't think that's a very likely outcome. I think probably we'll get, again, this kind of bifurcation where plenty of people are still quite skilled at the relevant kinds of like things we think make for a flourishing like cognitive life. And then I think an increasing number of people atrophies those skills because they don't need to use them. Like right now, there's demand to be good at those skills because there's demand elsewhere in the economy or like elsewhere in your social life to like, you know, be friendly, but not if you just have AI companions or not if there's not demand in the workplace for these cognitive skills anymore. So I think the future looks like one where, you know, on the margins, people are worse at these things. And among certain groups, people are a lot worse at these kinds of like basic core regulatory skills involved with like being the author of your own life, right? Like being able to set goals and like make plans to try to achieve them. This kind of like basic agentic like features of being a human. I think like we're headed towards like some people in some version of a Wall-E chair where they've like turned over that activity to machines.
Nate makes a compelling case that dependence on AI could compromise the vast array of cognitive functions that make us human. And if we cease to be human in ways that we believe are meaningful, what could this be called other than an apocalypse? But now I want to drill down on one of the specific cognitive functions Nate said is currently being degraded. I definitely recognize my own enfeeblement with regards to this mental process, and as a society, we seem to pretty much agree this core ability is being eroded. We all feel it every day. Of course, I'm talking about attention or attentional capacity. This expresses itself in obvious ways. I can't read books with the same focus I once could. I love reading, but I'm not as good at it as I used to be. In a conversation with friends recently about our deteriorating attention spans, I almost bragged that I could watch an hour of television without looking at my phone. We used to hear that TV could rot your brain. And now, watching a whole show uninterrupted is an act of commendable focus. I spoke with Johann Hari, author of Stolen Focus, about attention and how precious a resource it actually is. This conversation begins with a wider reference to modern technology, but we will fold this back into AI, I promise. Okay, and since I was talking about TV rotting your brain, the Oxford Word of the Year for 2024 was brain rot. Is that a metaphor or is something actually happening to our cognitive architecture?
Oh, it's not a metaphor at all. It's a literal physical process that's unfolding. You know, spend an hour on TikTok and then try to read Tolstoy, right? You're going to really struggle. How you use your brain changes your brain over time. There's a famous example in neuroscience. Taxi drivers in London have to pass an incredibly difficult test. It's called the knowledge. They have to memorize the entire map of London, which is not a city built on a grid, right? It's an extraordinarily difficult task. It takes people on average 2 years to learn that map before they can pass the test, right? If you look at brain scans of London taxi drivers, they don't look like your brain and my brain, right? They have a much bigger area of the hippocampus because they're using that spatial awareness and the memory around spatial awareness much more than you or I do, right? How you use your brain changes your brain.
This seems consistent with the Wall-E theory. Our brain literally changes depending on how we use it. But does it matter? I can't remember phone numbers now because I don't need to. I'm now using the space I used to use to remember how to get around my city for something else. Who cares? As long as it's not changing me and my relationship to the world in a meaningful way, then, oh wait, shoot, it is.
It also changes how you think. You know, I would say to anyone, take care what technologies you consume, because over time, your consciousness will come to resemble those technologies. If you spend all day reading nasty, sarcastic, horrible comments on Twitter, that will pattern your thinking, and you will walk through the world having lots more sarcastic, negative, unkind thoughts when you're not looking at Twitter, right? And there's really interesting research from this, people like Professor Raymond Marr in Toronto. If you spend all day reading novels, even when you're not reading a novel, you will be more empathetic, better able to simulate other people's internal lives, better able to think about what's going through their minds. So the technologies we consume shape our consciousness very profoundly. And if you're spending all day looking at absolutely meaningless garbage, that will pattern your consciousness, and your consciousness over time will come to resemble that meaningless garbage. We've upgraded the technology and downgraded humans.
This sounds really bad, but it's actually consistent with every technology that has led up to this moment. If you think about it, agriculture changed our relationship to the landscape. The printing press transformed our relationship to words. The George Foreman grill, Nintendo's Virtual Boy, I'm sure they did something. The list goes on. Is all of this simply the process of human beings adapting to the new technologies we create? In some ways, is this even harmonious? We have GPS now, so we don't need a big London taxi driver hippocampus. Is this the same as the way we probably don't need our appendix? Is this process almost natural? Johann says no, and identifies a more sinister mechanism behind all of this.
The most important thing for people to understand about our current attention crisis is that your attention did not collapse. Your children's attention did not collapse. Our attention has been stolen from us by some really big and powerful forces. And the evidence is very clear that when your ability to focus and pay attention deteriorates, your ability to achieve your goals deteriorates, your ability to solve your problems deteriorates, you feel worse about yourself because you actually are less competent when you can't pay attention. Attention is our superpower as a species. And at the moment, we are surrounded by kryptonite, right? It feels so intuitive that your attention is something under your own control, right? You think, well, if I'm not paying attention, that's a failing in me. I'm weak. I'm not good enough. But I think we need to understand that we are making individual choices in an environment that is massively rigged against us. As my friend Tristan Harris said when he testified before the Senate, another person who previously worked for Google, you can try having self-control, but every time you do, there are 10,000 engineers on the other side of the screen working very hard to undermine your self-control. The truth is, this crisis did not happen because you had bad habits and I had bad habits and our kids had bad habits. This happened because of some really big and powerful forces. I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley interviewing the people who designed key aspects of the world in which we now live. And the thing that most struck me about them was how sick with guilt and shame they feel about what they've done.
We're talking about paying attention like it's the most important thing we do as a species. Johann even claims attention is our superpower. But are these claims a little hyperbolic? Are AI-enabled TikTok algorithms truly an apocalyptic existential threat? Here's Johann on how attention facilitates the most important thing we do: finding meaning in our lives.
Attention evolved to attach to meaning. Sounds like a very grand and pompous statement, but it's pretty simple to understand. A frog will pay more attention to a fly than it will to a stone because the fly is meaningful to the frog and the stone is not. We all know this about our own attention. I'm a politics nerd. If you gave me a book about, I don't know, Gerald Ford's presidency, I would tear through that, right? I know it's pitiful. If you gave me a book about Formula One racing, I don't give a shit about Formula One racing. I would really struggle to pay attention to that, right? I would be bored. So when something is meaningful to you, it is much easier to pay attention to it. How do you figure out what you care about? How do you figure out what is meaningful to you? For all of that to happen, you need to have periods of rest. You need to have periods of mind wandering. You need to have periods of deep thought and discussion. Well, those are all things that are being driven out by the culture, right? When you have a crisis of attention, the main thing you lose is depth of thought and depth of engagement with other people. And I think that has disastrous effects, right? Imagine you're on your deathbed and I say, you never got a chance to think deeply. You never got a chance to think deeply about your goals, about what you were trying to achieve, about who you wanted to be, about how you wanted to treat the people around you, the people most important to you. You never got that. So the algorithms were initially set up just to discover, well, what makes people scroll, right? What keeps people scrolling? And they bumped into an underlying truth about human psychology. It's once been known about by psychologists for a long time. It's part of our mental toolkit. The technical term for it is negativity bias. Human beings will stare longer at things that make us angry and upset than we will at things that make us feel good. If you've ever seen a car crash on the highway, you know exactly what I mean. You stare longer at the mangled car wreck than you did at the pretty flowers on the other side of the street. People listening to this podcast, I'd like to think you're finding what I'm saying really interesting. But if in front of you, a bunch of guys start having a fist fight, you're going to stop listening to me and pay attention to the fist fight. This is very deep in human nature. 10-week-old babies will stare longer at angry faces than smiling faces, probably for a reason deep in our evolution. To put it a bit simplistically, our ancestors who didn't pay attention to the angry faces got eaten. They didn't get to be our ancestors, right? Now, that's always been part of our psychology. But when it combines with algorithms that learn you intimately, what makes you personally angry, it has a catastrophic effect.
This crisis of meaning could become an actual apocalypse of meaning. And we could find ourselves in some sort of slow motion catastrophe that never feels like the world is ending. But everything we've ever known about being human and having communities and connecting with one another is absolutely deteriorating. And this might not even be something that happens in the future. This could be happening right now. Like, we could be in it and not know it. Does this qualify as an apocalypse, even if it's not wanton death and destruction? With this thought in mind, let me tell you a bit of a story about what it's been like for the last few years as a person, me, raising young children in the shadow of this onslaught of technology. So a couple of years ago, my son got obsessed with this YouTube series called Skibbity Toilet. So if you have kids under 15, you're probably familiar with it. It's a series that was created inside this video game engine that itself was like digital scraps from a game called Half-Life. And in Skibbity Toilet, these enormous toilet-bodied creatures with human heads wage this endless war against other humanoid robots with camera heads and speaker heads and giant audio speaker torsos. You are not mishearing me. I said exactly what you think I did. This is wild. There's no coherent plot. There's no beginning. There's no middle. There's no end. None of the things we associate with story structure are there. It just keeps expanding. It's like new characters, new enemies, new, even more comprehensible lore, bigger battles. My son watched it obsessively. And then, just as quick as he started, he stopped when the novelty wore off and he realized it wasn't making any sense and probably never was. And I kid you not, Michael Bay, of all people, is making a feature film adaptation of this series right now. I'll just leave that one alone. I'm about to go deeper on my kids' media consumption habits before you hate on me for raising iPad kids. I promise you that's not the case. Their screen time's limited within reason, although I must admit it's a challenge. This is just culture today, especially youth culture. My wife and I want them to enjoy the things their friends are enjoying. And there's also a lot of like good social components to these games. Like, I played lots of video games as a kid. It's not the end of the world, but it's hard. Some of the social components of these things I've realized are actually antisocial. So that gets me to the next piece of this story. In the wake of Skibbity Toilet, my son and my younger daughter then turned their attention to this Roblox game called Steal a Brain Rot. Yes, Steal a Brain Rot. The title doesn't even make sense. In this game, you're competing for these creatures called brain rots. They have crazy names like Bombardiero, Crocodilio, Tralalero, Tralala. These AI-generated images of these crazy, absurd animal mashups, like part crocodile, part military bomber plane, part fish, part trumpet. It reminds me of half alligator, half shark, half man from Dr. Octagon. It's set to this like really chaotic Italian electronic music. It's loud, it's fast, it's deeply unconcerned with making sense. You play the game by deceiving other players so you can steal their brain rots. That's it. That's the entire game. You steal meaningless things from your real friends. It's really odd because it's at once cruel and nonsensical. And that lack of meaning behind the cruelty somehow makes it feel even more cruel. I played the game with my kids a little just to kind of see what they were getting themselves into. And I genuinely ended up feeling bad. Like, I straight up stole something from my 8-year-old daughter, and she was sad about it. And that's what I had to do to win the game. And I have this like really weird philosophy that I refuse to let my kids win at anything. I just don't think it's good for their self-confidence. Anyways, this was awful. And fortunately, my son told me just today that no one plays Steal a Brain Rot anymore, which is a relief to me. And when my kids referred to the game, they referred to it almost as a genre when I asked them about it. Of course, that genre was called brain rot. And remember what we discussed with Johann just a few minutes ago? This is where this all goes from being kind of a funny story to something concerning, and then it'll get really concerning for the end. But brain rot isn't just a metaphor. It's a thing that actually happens to your actual brain. Now, I realize I sound like an old man here. My parents probably thought Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was incomprehensible garbage. First of all, they were wrong. Second, this is a tangent within my tangent, but a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles themed pizza restaurant just opened in Los Angeles, and I'm going to try to make it out there in the next couple months. I will leave a review as bonus content if I go there, and I will also prove to my parents that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were never meaningless garbage. Anyway, back to the point. Maybe this is all just generational confusion. Maybe every generation's children's entertainment is nonsensical to the previous generation. And if that's the case, that's fine. But I kept thinking about something that Eliezer Yudkowsky wrote whenever I would think about Steal a Brain Rot or Skibbity Toilet. You've heard Eliezer's name a bunch of times this season. He's the person who first theorized that AI alignment could be a problem. He built Miri, the organization that our frequent guest, Malo Burgone, runs. And he's spent years arguing that we are currently building something that will kill us. And the thing that Yudkowsky said that I couldn't get out of my head was about how the AI apocalypse would announce itself. In a 2017 essay that he wrote about warning signs, he wrote that we assume if AI were going wrong, truly catastrophically wrong, that someone would notice, that there would be a fire alarm, that events would clarify, that the threat would become legible, and then we'd respond. But Yudkowsky doesn't believe that will happen. He argues that the development of something catastrophically dangerous would be messy and confusing, and that things would stop making sense before anyone understood why. That you'd see anomalies, strange events, behavior that doesn't add up, but there would be nothing that would really cohere into a legible threat. This is a direct quote. There is no fire alarm for artificial intelligence, only the gradual, disorienting feeling that things have stopped making sense. Things will stop making sense. Skibbity Toilet does not make sense. Steal a Brain Rot does not make sense. And then I thought, even if this isn't apocalyptic in the way we usually think of, what does it mean that we spent 5 years teaching a generation of young minds to be fluent in meaninglessness, to prefer content that resists interpretation, that isn't even trying to mean anything? Max Tegmark, the physicist who wrote Life 3.0, one of the kind of critical texts of the AI safety movement, opens a book with this fictional story. In his story, a company builds an advanced AI called Prometheus and deploys it gradually, quietly, in ways that no one notices. It earns money by writing code and then producing viral media. Through that viral media, it makes more money. It then uses that money to trade stocks. And none of this looks alarming. It just kind of builds the way you would if you were an aspiring media mogul. Every anomaly has a plausible explanation. And what happens is that Prometheus completely takes over, and it's invisible because all of its actions look like background noise. And the question is whether we're capable of noticing what happens in our real world, or whether our collective meaning-making apparatus, our ability to say, this is unusual, this is wrong, something is off, is functional enough to sound an alarm. As I was sitting here watching my kids play Steal a Brain Rot, I was actually thinking, what if this is exactly what Max Tegmark described? And the thing is, the first time I read Life 3.0, it's a nonfiction book. So I thought he was describing a company that actually existed, and I couldn't believe I hadn't heard of it. I couldn't believe that I didn't know these things were happening. So when I started to see these things actually happen, when I started to see this media being produced that didn't make sense, it was getting millions, and then hundreds of millions, and eventually billions of views on YouTube. and the game was down. The Steal a Brain Rot game was being played by hundreds of thousands of kids simultaneously. I started thinking that Steal a Brain Rot and Skibbity Toilet and some of the other things I've seen kids engage with could be purposely engineered AI nonsense built to steal attention and usher in a quiet apocalypse. Like, I thought the beginning of Max Tegmark's book was actually happening in our real world. Sometimes I still wonder if that's the case. The thing is that, like, paranoia aside, like, I don't think this is impossible. I think we're inside of this genuine cultural moment where a generation is being trained to get comfortable with insanity, to scroll past confusion without pausing to ask why, to say, hey, this stopped making sense a while ago, and just to not care because not making sense is just kind of the vibe now. And maybe it's not just the younger generation. Maybe it's my generation too. Maybe it's all of us. When we come back from the break, Dr. Amy Levy will tell us about how AI could be priming us to be a more docile, servile species. I spoke with Dr. Amy Levy about this attention crisis, about how it's altered the way we exist as humans, and the slow psychological death we unknowingly embrace daily. How is our relationship to the world different, just even a year ago?
I just read The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James, which is an amazing snapshot of what life was like in this period of time. And these people think all the time. They spend hours conversing, but also sitting at a park bench, contemplating what's happened. Very, very deep trains of thought that converge with one another. I mean, that was a cultivated way of being. It's very rare to find anyone who does that any longer. I think that there is a capacity for thought and for self-exploration that we are losing. And I think it's unprecedented.
We don't think deep thoughts on park benches much anymore. Okay, fine. But do we need to? Maybe that was wasted time, all that stressing out, sitting around thinking in beautiful public spaces. Sure, the pigeons won't get fed anymore, but what if we just hand over the hard thinking work to AI? Will we be happier? Here's more from Amy about AI and the psychological concept of Eros. Very broadly, Freud uses Eros to mean the life drive, the opposite of the death drive, which we have covered at length in a previous episode. We'll link to it in the show notes.
I think it's possible that AI is in the service of Eros, similar to Freud's thinking about civilization. Yes, we're all dying slow deaths every time we spend 5 hours scrolling on Instagram. But we are relatively placid, we're calm, we're not hurting anyone. We feel pretty happy. Our individual instinctive lives and energies are sort of withering, but we're coming together increasingly as a collective. And we follow the same leaders, the same ideas. Maybe at some point they won't even be human leaders. Maybe they'll be algorithms, AIs telling us what to believe. But we may be a more docile species, less inclined to be destructive. That was his thinking about civilization, that it curbs our destructive inclinations. And AI could be seen as functioning at this current time in a similar way, where it organizes us. And we defer to it, and then we're less likely to squabble with one another.
And look, this all isn't without certain appeal, right? I mean, who likes squabbles? Let's just go full Dr. Strangelove, how I learned to stop worrying and loved AI for doing my thinking for me. But then, aren't we back to Homer and the Lotus Eaters? This fundamental temptation to relinquish the tension of being human, to stop being human, in a sense. And I don't know, this seems bad. Right? So if we wanted to resist all of this that's currently happening, if I want to be able to go to the park and sit on a bench and talk to somebody as opposed to just staring down at my phone, how do we even start?
I think it begins with that self-reflective moment of, hold on, we're not thinking. We need to think. We need to feel. There's this dependence on the algorithms to make sense of things. It used to be that human beings would rely on their own feelings and their own minds to navigate, and that's slipping away. And I think just being aware of that instantly gives rise to a wish to take it back. There's something so seductive about digital life. We put in our earphones and we scroll and we get all this information and we're talking and all these ideas are going, and flowing and information is flowing so freely. And then like what you said, we're not actually thinking, we're not really reflecting. And it feels to me like we're all sort of converging, into this one great mass. And all our data floating around and the algorithms making sense of it and giving it back to us. And we're kind of losing our minds.
This is a critical point I want to dig into more. The Lotus eaters. The ease with which we give up our deep thinking and our attention. My immediate instinct is this is probably not a good thing for what it means to be a human on Earth. But on the other hand, what's so great about all that mental work that makes us so miserable so much of the time anyway? Maybe Lotus sounds really good. Where can I get some? Maybe we should just relax and eat until there are no more worries. Maybe we don't need to try hard things, think uncomfortable thoughts, learn, grow, fight through pain. What good is all of our thinking with these big brains done for us anyway? What do we have to show for it? A dying planet that we don't have the will to fix? Or maybe we do. Maybe we just haven't gotten there quite yet. Maybe we still have at least a few more millennia of loving, creating art, creating music, using our bodies and minds in increasingly esoteric ways to push the limits of what it means to be human. That sounds like a lot of work. And maybe the work is what gives us meaning. Maybe it's not. I recently spoke with Sameer Gupta of EvenPlay, a skill-based sports gambling platform, which I recognize sounds like a strange detour in an episode already filled with strange detours, but trust me, Sameer is one of the most incisive and interesting minds working in artificial intelligence today. We discussed the contentious relationship between human flourishing and human thinking and what gambling theory might reveal about our fundamental psychology. First, I asked Sameer some broader questions about AI and how it's immediately changing our world and what it means to be human. What are you thinking when you see, because I'm sure when you see whatever it is, AI is going to destroy the world or AI is going to give us this techno-utopia, when I see that, there's a piece of me that says, could either of these things be right? Like, I doubt it because I've seen enough things not dramatically transform society. But as you who knows the technology well and you who sees the technology from the inside, when you see those things, what are you thinking? Are you excited for this next moment? Are you afraid? Are you both?
I make these comments and, they're a little bit thought-provoking and they're probably a little bit true, which is I think that in America, 50 million people will lose their jobs over the next 2 years. And by lose their jobs, I don't mean unemployed. What I mean is that what they woke up today thinking, this is what I'm going to do, this is my work, is not what it's going to be in 24 months. I think there's a big difference between unemployment and job change. And I think what we're going to have over the next 2 years is a significant amount of job change. That the people that woke up today and they're accountants and they were like, okay, well, what I do today and what I did last year and what I did 5 years before that is, create these Excel spreadsheets and fill in these tax forms and submit them to the IRS. Well, if that's what you're doing in accounting right now, I may suggest that might not be what you're doing in 24 months. If your job is as a lawyer to take briefings from the senior lawyers and from other meetings and to do paralegal work and to do research and to create briefs, compiling information across thousands of sources into shorter documents that can be read by other people making decisions and spending money, I might suggest that in 24 months, you might not be doing that job. And that chaos is something that deserves to be discussed.
And that is so unbelievably threatening to so many people because we equate what we do for a living, how much money we earn, all of these things with our self-worth, not just our net worth. And obviously I've been researching this a lot, but it's interesting to think of there's different data on this. I don't know what to believe, but I just saw something the other day that pre-industrial people worked an average of 15 hours a week. and that this 40 to 60 to 80 hour grind that we're all in to try to improve our lives, improve the quality of our financial lives anyway. This is a relatively new thing. And is that conversation happening? When you talk about a UBI, is this just so that people don't starve, or how are you accounting for people's self-worth, self-esteem, and what they do with their time?
We were sold the promise of tomorrow and us creating societal worth at some point in our careers. But that stopped being true. And now we do what we're doing because we did it yesterday. And we're going to do it today. And by giving it up, we cause more pain and chaos to our friends, family, and ourselves. So we choose to do it again. If you wiped the slate clean of all professions right now in the United States of America, or even globally, how many people would wake up and say, I want to do the exact same thing as I did yesterday?
5%.
So maybe we get the chance to reinvent and to actually start to reconnect and do things that we're passionate about. I think it offers us the opportunity for the first time in a long time, AI does. If it does change everything, and if everybody does get to wake up tomorrow without the compulsion to do the same work that they did yesterday, what would they choose to do? What would happen if we stopped worrying about money or social prestige?
Everyone would be happier.
I think so, Sean. I mean, I think so, but it's an experiment that's worth running, in my opinion. And I think we have the chance to do it. And the only way that we can do it is through AI. It's not going to be human beings that lead us into this future, Sean. Human beings have run things to this point. And, you know, if you dig into the histories, Alan Watts' series is fantastic about, you know, Eastern philosophies and, you know, what Siddhartha sitting below the tree realized when he became the Buddha, right? And, you know, there was too much information at that time, thousands of years ago. You know, money and prestige was a huge problem for him then, right? Like, so apparently these are like human conditions. It's just like, you know, he was a prince. So he probably felt them in a way that like maybe the farmer or the peasant didn't feel them at the same way at the same time, but they did resonate. It resonated with the farmer and it resonated with the peasant. I'm not saying money and prestige are bad. What I'm saying is that just like my aunt told me, and, you know, we pray to our God, Ganesh Chaturthi is coming up, and, you know, you pray for wealth and monetary success, but it's within a larger scope of prayers. It's within a God pantheon where you're praying for art and love and family and everything like that. We need to right size these things so they don't dominate us. So, I mean, I that's why I'm such a white mirror person. I really do think that I do not trust humanity to figure out any of this. I don't trust politicians. I don't trust CEOs. I don't trust technologists. Human beings, in all of my experience, all my 44 years, have gotten us into all of this. The ones that are in charge are loudly saying, well, if you want us to do better, somebody better tell us what to do because we have no idea what you're talking about. And then there's silence back.
I was struck by Sameer saying that those in charge are asking for feedback from the rest of us, but that we simply aren't giving it. Is this true? If so, why? Do we not care? Or do most of us just not know this conversation's happening? Have we become so used to technology happening to us that we no longer realize it should be a tool for us to improve the experience of being a human on Earth?
And it's great to have your podcast and this conversation around. Most people, for most of my life, have not wanted to talk about this stuff. I remember I went to like the Singularity conference many years ago. Let's call it 15 years ago in San Francisco. And I was looking around a room, and you can imagine who was in the room at the Singularity conference 15 years ago in San Francisco. It was a lot of engineers and futurists, right? And I looked around and I went to my friends, and a lot of my friends are not that. There's a lot of friends that are in the arts, humanities, you know, artists, musicians, athletes, business people, philosophers, whatever. Like I have a wide variety of friends, and I went around and I was like, hey guys, everybody needs to get into that room. because that's the room that's building it all. And we need to make sure that it's not just the engineers, and sometimes the engineers that don't like the physical universe, that are trying to create a digital universe, that that's not what's going to be driving this, singularity, which I believe in. I'm sure you've talked about it a little bit, but it's like, a digital future, right? Where artificial intelligence uploads the human consciousness and we live independent of space and time. And I do believe that's going to happen. But the notion that we need a wide cross section of humanity, and not just American humanity, like the global humanity, to have their input on what our digital future looks like. I think that conversation needs to be had at every level. I'm not a big believer that governments are in the best position to make changes in this area, but I do think that they can put pressure on private corporations and private citizens to start making decisions in regards to how we direct the future of this technology.
How do we direct the future of technology? That's the whole game, and one of the seemingly insurmountable challenges, because even if we trust that AI could take on the burden of organizing a better and more equitable social order, we hope it understands the best version of ourselves. This isn't even an alignment issue like we previously discussed. It's more like, I hope it's trained on Siddhartha, like Sameer mentions, and not Skibbity Toilet. But the truth is, right now, it's not necessarily learning from our better angels. It's learning from Reddit and 4chan. Have you been on 4chan lately? Is this what we want AI to think we are? How do we think about the human behavior that trains the AI? Not the human behavior we hope and pray for, but the human behavior as practiced in the real world. And maybe we are 4chan, maybe we are Reddit, or maybe we're something else entirely. When we come back from the break, Sameer Gupta goes deeper on the psychology of gaming and how if we aren't careful, AI could end up acting like the very versions of ourselves we try so hard to hide. Carl Jung famously called the version of ourselves we try to hide our shadow self. This is where your vices live, where your darkest thoughts sit and marinate. Sameer Gupta believes we might be feeding these shadows directly to AI to train them.
I'll get into my area of acute expertise, which is game mechanics and human behavior and how that relates to AI. One of the things that I think we don't talk about enough is, AI is trained on human data sets and human behavior. And we like to intellectualize what human beings do. But if you really look at what human beings do, it's not what the intellectuals claim that we do. It's the vices. The largest entertainment industry in the world is real money games. Gambling, lottery, casino, and the like, $570 billion in revenue last year. That's more than video games, TV, music, sports, movies combined. We don't talk about it because we consider it a vice. When you look at the sugar industry or the alcohol or the drugs industry, the sex industry, these are much larger industries than the things that we like covering in the Wall Street Journal. That is actually human behavior. And if you go to the internet, you will find all of that on the internet. The internet is very democratizing when it comes to the majority of content on the internet is stuff that we don't like talking about. And if we're training AI on that, are we filtering that out or are we including it?
Okay, real quick, I want to define a few terms Sameer is about to use. This is really important stuff. These terms are variable reward payout loops and compulsion loops. I wasn't aware of these terms before speaking with Sameer, but I've certainly experienced them. In fact, these forces affect me daily. They affect you too. Variable reward payout loop is the slot machine principle. The reason slot machines are more addictive than vending machines is because the vending machine always gives you the Doritos when you put in the money and ask for the Doritos. The slot machine might give you something, and you don't know when, and you don't know exactly what. That uncertainty is the entire mechanism. Your brain does not get desensitized to a reward it can't predict, so it keeps pushing you to pull the lever. Instagram's a slot machine. Every time you open it, you might see something that makes you feel great. A friend's news, a hilarious video, someone responding to your post, 50 likes on a picture. Or you might see nothing interesting at all. You might see something that makes you really sad. You don't know. You just keep opening it. The variability is not a bug here. It's the entire product. A compulsion loop is the structural container that the variable reward lives inside. It's the cycle. See something that triggers you, boom, take an action, boom, get a reward, boom, that triggers you to do it again. In a video game, you might fight an enemy. You then get experience points and loot. The loot unlocks a new level. The new level has more enemies. The loop never closes. It feeds back into itself. The design goal is to make sure there's never a natural stopping point. There's not a single moment where the game goes, okay, you're good, you're done. Social media works the exact same way. You scroll, you get a hit of something interesting, which makes you scroll more, which occasionally gives you another hit. You're not consuming content. You're pulling a lever that's been engineered by people who understand your psychology better than you do in a loop that has no exit. The reason Sameer's point lands hard is that he's saying AI is being trained on the output of these loops, not on what we aspire to be, but on what we actually do when no one's watching. And the lever's right there on each of our own pockets.
And this is the humanity that I know so well that I think the intellectuals like to ignore in their, predictions of human behavior or where AI is going to go. These variable reward payout loops, are the AIs trained on the same? Again, the largest entertainment industry in the world involves people putting money into a system that they're going to get less money out of because of the entertainment value in that activity. Is our AI going to be trained, the same way? These compulsion loops are obviously endemic in the gaming industry, but they're also endemic in the video game industry. They're literally what video games, everything from Candy Crush to the new GTA is all run on the same operant conditioning, but it's also what the internet is based on and what social media is based on. Those dopamine hits, that variable reward payout. You post something, how many likes am I going to get? That's all basic operant conditioning with compulsion loops with variable reward payouts. This is what drives almost all human behavior, and we don't like talking about it. So my question is, how are we going to pattern match this into our AI? Because I don't think we should ignore it or let all the intellectuals assume that we're making decisions based on, goodwill or the best of humanity. I think we're humans and we're going to do human stuff. And that the AI, if it's trained to be like humans, is going to start doing the same stuff that we do.
Sameer's reckoning with the same obstinate forces as Johann. The human mind, negativity bias, compulsion loops, the death drive, as we've previously discussed. These qualities we developed at some point along the way as some sort of survival mechanism are now our weakness. The fissure in our code waiting to be exploited. And even the optimistic elements of our discussion are messy. All of this is. When I was talking with Sameer earlier, I speculated that 5% of people would continue in their current profession if the slate was wiped clean and they could start over without worrying about money. The context was an AI-powered universal income or post-economic situation of some sort. But I wasn't content with my own speculation. So I decided to conduct a poll. I didn't have time before this episode needed to be edited to go to a mall or something. Besides, who goes to malls anymore? So I went where the people actually are, Instagram. And while my Instagram friends probably aren't an exact random sampling of the population, I received responses from people with some of the following professions. Film people, lots and lots of film people, cinematographers, editors, an actor. But beyond entertainment, I had lawyers, real estate agents, personal trainers, entrepreneurs, and service industry professionals. So I think that's kind of a random sampling. And the results stunned me, truly. 77% of people in my very non-official poll said they would continue doing what they do today to make ends meet, even if they didn't need to make money. And this made me feel really good for everyone. Good as in, hey, a lot of us like the way we spend 40 to 80 hours per week. We've found things we're passionate about, and that's how we add value to society and also create income for ourselves. But then almost immediately after, this made me profoundly sad because maybe all the excitement I had when talking to Sameer about a workless future would be a future in which we are no longer needed to do the things we currently are. And that would strip our lives of even more meaning than we've already lost to the various agents of distraction. But this is the moment. This is the crisis. None of us can know if there's an apocalypse looming, but we can bet on it on Polymarket. We also don't know what form that apocalypse could take. Brain rot apocalypse, Skynet apocalypse, nuclear war, new plague, climate disaster, meteor the size of Connecticut. Sorry, I was having a little too much fun with that. But we do know this. There's a long history of people planning for the end of the world. In fact, much longer than you might imagine. In the next episode of Suspicious Minds, we explore the fascinating and rich history of doomsday prepping and meet the man building the world's most secure bunker island compound.
Am I like Noah's Ark? Is God having me build this for a reason? Sometimes I get like that. It's like, why?
If you're enjoying Suspicious Minds, be sure to follow or subscribe. And if you really like the show, make sure to rate us on Apple Podcasts and like on other platforms. If you want to learn more, you can go to the show notes where you can find links to our socials, along with links to works from our contributors. They appreciate your support, and so do we. Also, as a heads up, from now on, Suspicious Minds will be dropping every single week. Thank you so much for listening.